Israel's military has intensified its offensive in northern Gaza. Hamas health officials there say at least 23 Palestinians were killed by Israeli strikes on Friday. Dozens more were injured. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has come under heavy criticism from international allies as the humanitarian crisis worsens in Gaza. But he says he has a three-part plan to address food shortages. The first phase is approval of basic food deliveries to avert starvation. The second phase would see US companies distribute food. In the third phase, so-called sterile zones free of Hamas would be created where Palestinians should move and receive aid. Israel has built security corridors, marked here in solid blue, and so-called buffer zones. Those are the red parts of this map that divide Gaza into several pieces. Israel has also implemented no-go areas marked here with red stripes. Netanyahu has also said that Palestinians who go to the planned sterile zone, which you can see there in the south, quote, don't necessarily go back. And now let's have a look at this more closely with Marina Miron. She's a military analyst from the Defence Studies Department at King's College London. Marina, is this concept of sterile zones grounded in any known military doctrine?
Good day, Gerhard. Well, it's a name that the Israelis are using, but essentially it is about separating the population from a violent non-state actor, Hamas in our case here. So the task will be similar to what the strategic hamlets were in Vietnam, what the New Village program was during the Malayan emergency, and those wars took place during the decolonization era, so in 1950s and 60s. Essentially, you put the population in secure villages with barbed wire around it back in the days, and control for who enters, who exits, in order to ensure that there is no contact with the insurgents. And so the idea is to rob the insurgents of population support, and at the same time you would want to win hearts and minds, so you would offer some sort of economic incentives as a government, you would want to offer aid, and so on and so forth. So I imagine that this will be something very similar to that.
Now, from a military perspective, how viable do you think is the establishment of these so-called sterile zones in southern Gaza?
Well, the theory is always very simple and logical, but in practice, establishing those zones is manpower intensive and costly undertaking that will also cost a lot of time, because the problem is that the insurgents do not wear uniforms, or to the most part they do not wear uniforms. It's very difficult to separate civilians from them, and therein lies the problem, because if you mistreat civilians, if you kill civilians, then you already have a hostile population in addition to an ongoing insurgency. And so it will require very accurate intelligence. It will require also cooperation with civilian agencies, such as provisional reconstruction teams in Afghanistan, which have not worked that well, because it is a difficult undertaking. It's understood how it should be executed, but at the execution level, there is a problem of the military not being trained for these kinds of more civilian-oriented tasks. And by civilian-oriented, I mean kind of a social tasks. That's not what the military does. They can control the area, but then you will have to bring in that civilian component, and that also will be difficult and depends on how it's going to be solved and who is going to be involved. Apparently, US agencies will be responsible for food, but what about medical aid, education, and so on?
Now, let's look at the logistics of this. What kind of military presence or technical surveillance infrastructure would be required to secure and monitor such a zone?
Well, if we take what we have seen in past wars of this kind as a point of departure, you will need some sort of physical fence in order to separate the population. You will have to have surveillance. You will have to have curfews, and that's what you can read from history. So people were not feeling very happy being in those strategic hamlets or new villages or whichever name there was, because many countries use the system, including Turkey, against the PKK insurgency in late 80s, early 90s. This kind of village guard program was incorporated as well. So you will have to somehow win hearts and minds. At the same time, you need to tightly control the population, where it goes, who goes out, who goes in. And so it will require a considerable amount of logistics, because you have to understand that at the same time, the IDF will be trying to eliminate Hamas. So the war will still be ongoing, and you have this parallel effort, which is not strictly military, running, when you also need manpower in order to conduct your military operations there. So it is a very difficult undertaking, and this is why these so-called small wars last for 20, 30 years, if you look at history.
The military analyst, Marina Miron there. Thank you very much, Marina.
And for more, I can now speak to DW correspondent Tania Krämer, who joins us from Jerusalem. Tania, so the first phase of Netanyahu's plan now seems to have begun. What is the latest on aid entering Gaza?
Yeah, the UN and United Nations and humanitarian organizations have said they were able to collect about 90 trucks. There were about 200 trucks that entered in the past 2 days, the Kerem Shalom crossing. Then they're in a staging area, and then they have to be collected by the humanitarian organizations. On their trucks there was flour and some nutritional supplements, as far as we know, some medical supplies. This is also according to the Kogat, the authority that is administering the crossings, who actually said yesterday also in a post that they still claim there is no shortage of food, but that these supplies now went into Gaza. Now we understand from the World Food Programme that some of the flour was now transported to a bakery in central Gaza, in Deir Balach. We could see, the pictures coming from there. The bakeries, they're working all night to make bread and to deliver it, to distribute it to people. People I talked to, they said they had to stand for hours in line to get one of those bags with some bread loaves in there. Now, this is all a very limited amount of food that's coming in after a blockade of 11 weeks. And we heard UN officials saying, they're welcoming anything that goes in, but they're also saying this is really a drop in the ocean. This is not enough. It's also not quite clear, the distribution of that. Already it is difficult to pick up those trucks, the United Nations says, because it's also, they have to go through, coordinate this with the Israeli military. It's usually an active or militarized zone, but also then the distribution to people, for example, in northern Gaza. Most of them have been called upon by the army to evacuate and to leave, because it is now an active combat zone. But also in Gaza City, people told me on the phone that they haven't seen really anything changing yet on the, in matters of what is available in the market for them. And they're also saying, it's also very dangerous for them to go to those if there's a distribution point, because there's constant bombardment, as they told me. So there is something, trickle of aid going in, but certainly not enough for the over 2 million people in Gaza.
And what can you tell us about the sterile zones, as Netanyahu is calling them? What does the Prime Minister mean when he says when people enter, they don't necessarily go back?
Yeah, he described this as a plan in 3 stages, and these sterile zones, we actually only know what he told us basically here, is that they will be created in the south. These will be for people that, as the Israeli government put it, relocated or evacuated from combat zones. They should go to these areas. What we understand from Israeli officials here, they will be screened going into these areas because they want to make sure that there are no militants in those zones, and it is there where humanitarian aid would then be distributed by private American contractors there. This area will be secured by the Israeli military. Now, we don't know what that means exactly for people, if they then, once the war ends, will be able to go back. This plan has also been very much criticized by the United Nations, by other aid organizations. They say, they have a very robust plan to distribute aid, what they've done for many, many years in Gaza. This is against also their neutrality, but also they say the aid should be coming to people and not people should be displaced to get to the aid. And also in light of the fact that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said that, most of the territory, all of Gaza will be then under Israeli security control. There's even more question mark what that means for people to be able, once they have been displaced to these areas, whether they will be able to go back to where they came from and where they lived.
DW correspondent Tania Krämer in Jerusalem. Great to get those insights. Thank you so much.
Deliveries of food and medicine have started to trickle back into Gaza. Israel had suspended most aid from entering the territory since mid-May. It said the blockade was part of its strategy to topple Hamas. But humanitarian organizations say the aid coming in now falls far short of meeting the basic needs of the civilian population.
It's been weeks since this bakery last fired up its oven. The lack of supplies forced the owner to close, as Gaza ran out of wheat, flour and cooking fuel 2 months ago. As aid begins to trickle back into the strip, workers are producing bread for thousands of people in need.
Symbolically, the smell of a fresh bread is the smell of hope. What we brought is definitely not enough, but we hope that the borders will remain open and we'll be able to bring more aid into Gaza. 2.2 million people of Gaza, almost everyone depends on humanitarian aid.
Desperately hungry Gazans crowded some of the trucks entering the strip, trying to secure a bag of flour. Until this week, Israel had forbidden all humanitarian aid entering Gaza since the beginning of March, saying Hamas was stealing and profiting from it. The Palestinian Authority health minister says more than 25 children and elderly people have died from starvation in recent days, and has warned thousands more are at risk. Gaza's main hospital is overwhelmed with children suffering from the effects of the blockade.
Since I gave birth, I keep spending time in the hospital. I leave for a few days, only to return again. He's malnourished, has infections everywhere, and a blood infection. There's no baby formula. There's no milk at all.
According to the UN Children's Agency, more than 9,000 children have been treated for malnutrition this year. As some food and medicine finally arrives, Gaza is still under bombardment, with Israel saying it will escalate its military operations, making aid deliveries even more difficult.